Welcome to the Project Management Coaching Podcast with certified trainer and project management expert, Dan Ryan.
Hey everybody, this is PM Exam Coach Dan. I'm back with the second episode of my new podcast at projectmanagementcoachingpodcast.com. Thank you so much for joining me during this episode. This is going to be a very exciting episode because we're going to be talking about something very interesting. All right. So many people scrambled to get version 5 of the PMP exam done because they were so afraid about the unknowns related to taking version 6 of the PMP exam, which we knew came out on March 26th of this current year of 2018. And the promise was that the new exam would be loaded with all kinds of Agile as well as, other types of content. So everybody rushed to get the version 5 exam done. But my particular question was, there really a big difference between the version 5 and the version 6 exam? And how do we find out? So I was in contact with one of my former students. His name was Frank Napolitano. And Frank was in a unique position to having taken both the version 5 as well as the version 6 PMP exam. So who better to ask than Frank to find out, what are the differences, if any, between the version 5 and the version 6 exam. All right, so Frank is a project manager who, sort of made a transition into project management. He took a crack at version 5. And, didn't work out, so he came back right after the exam changed on version 6, and he took version 6, and that worked out much better for him. All right, so that's going to be the interview coming up in just a moment with Frank Napolitano. Be aware that the PMP exam has changed, in case you didn't know. And, there's been the emergence of Agile as more of a component of the PMP exam now. Personally, I am PMI ACP. I'm Agile certified, so I can see that when I study and when I train people on the new version of the PMP exam, I see many of those Agile concepts that I saw on the PMI ACP exam as well. So, the project manager in the traditional PMI sense is this project manager that's large and in charge, and they make the decisions, they expend the resources, and they take corrective actions, and they control the scope, and they make sure that all the project deliverables are done according to the project's objectives. What we're going to see as we transition more towards an agile world, and let me assure you that regardless of your industry, you are likely to see the emergence of agile processes and techniques, even in your industry. What we are seeing is, the emergence of the project manager more as a facilitator. All right. Your Scrum Master in Agile is somebody who is not really, the number one decision maker or somebody in charge, but they are more of a facilitator, more of what's called a servant leader. Okay, and their primary job is to support the team, the project team. And if there's any kind of obstacles to the team being able to get their work done, the project manager or the Scrum Master will remove those obstacles. All right, if they're in a working space or environment that's not conducive to teamwork, the Scrum Master or the PM will change the environment and make it more amenable for the team to be working together. If there are particular stakeholders who are causing a lot of scope creep or continually putting demands or interruptions onto the project team, then that also is the job of the PM. If the PM notices that there are stakeholders who are interrupting the team or causing a lot of change requests, the project manager, the Scrum Master, will also work to educate that stakeholder on the processes that the team's following and to minimize the distractions that are placed on that team. All right, so these are all of the new sort of emerging roles of the project manager, and in the beginning of the version 6 of the new PMBOK. Certainly there is a chapter called the role of the project manager. As well, there is a section called the environment within which projects operate. All right, so right now it looks like we are seeing some Agile sprinkled through the various PMBOK domains and knowledge areas. I would expect that to be a trend that would continue. And as the PMBOK progresses, I would imagine that it would be becoming more and more agile in nature. However, from what we'll see when we talk to Frank Napolitano, that's not necessarily, at least in Frank's idea, a bad thing, okay? He is one of these people who feels that the new structure of the PMBOK has been aligned in such a way where it's a lot more thoughtful, a lot more straightforward, and a lot more organized in an intuitive way, in order for to match the reality of real life more. All right, so that's just a quick introduction on sort of what we're going to be talking about and thinking about in this podcast with Frank as we look at version 5 of the PMBOK, which was, strictly more towards the old-fashioned waterfall or traditional project management. And now as we consider this agile project delivery, and with the version 6, and as we go towards a more agile world. All right, great. All right, so just a brief introduction here. We're going to be starting the podcast with Frank, and we'll see you in just a minute. Thanks.
Welcome to the Project Management Coaching Podcast with certified trainer and project management expert, Dan Ryan.
Hey everybody, it's PM Exam Coach Dan, and I'm back with my second podcast episode from the Project Management Coaching Podcast.com, and very excited to do my second interview, and I have a great interview lined up with Frank Napolitano. So Frank is a project manager who is PMP certified, and Frank has a very unique background and a unique story to tell. Frank prepared for the version 5 of the PMP exam, was unable to pass it, and then subsequently he went for the version 6 of the PMP exam, and he did in fact pass it. So Frank turns out to be the perfect guy for us to sit and chat with to see, a little gap analysis here between version 5 of the PMP exam and version 6 of the PMP exam. So we are going to have a chat with Frank about that now. So, Frank, thank you so much for being with us today. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background as a project manager in the industry?
Sure, and thank you very much, Dan, for the opportunity to speak today and share my experiences. So I've been in different consulting roles and project management leadership roles over the past 15, 20 years, mainly in telecom and technology environments. Currently, for the past year, I've worked for a credit card payment processing company, but prior to that, I was mainly in the telecommunications and technology space. Approximately a year ago, I took the courses, in-person class, for the in preparation for the PMP to take my...
You did a boot camp.
Hours of contact, exactly, a boot camp. And I actually switched careers, switched positions, and switched industries right around the time that I became eligible, finished that course up, and became eligible to take my PMP exam. So now I'm learning a new industry and starting at a new company, learning new culture. At the same time, I should be studying for my PMP exam, so it put a delay in that process. I still took the exam I was already scheduled for because it's a little bit costly to reschedule it, and I was bound and determined, but I just didn't have the time to dedicate to the studying that I wanted to obviously learn all the materials and be prepared for the exam. So I sat for the first exam probably about 9 months ago now, and I was very much ill-prepared, clearly. As I said, I started a new position. And,
so that was sort of
travel.
That was sort of you just, maybe did some light studying. You knew you weren't fully prepared, but you went in there on a whim, sort of, and just went through with it.
Yeah, I wanted to know what I didn't know at that point, right? So,
okay.
Just went in and didn't do as well as I would have liked to have, and needed to kind of regroup. So again, doing a lot of work travel, I wasn't able to dedicate the time to sitting down and, reading the books and studying the course material. So I found, just doing a few searches, I found a couple of different sources, including yourself, for audio, for recorded sessions, for live sessions, that I could study while I'm on the road. I could study on my leisure. So started doing that and trying to prepare, but still, doing a lot of work travel and focusing on the project that we have underway. I was having to dedicate a lot of time to that. But anyway, so took my second attempt was back in beginning of March 3rd, and then my eligibility was about to run out. Actually, my eligibility runs out on April 8th, so I had to take it one last time because I didn't pass it on attempt 2, and of course we knew that the exam was changing, so I started studying up for the changes for PMBOK 6 to the best of my ability with somewhat limited resources out there, but still studying everything that was in 5 and just kind of focusing on these changes that are right on the PMI website as to what the changes were for 6 and what those exam changes were going to be. The company I work for is an Agile shop, so those Agile changes weren't going to be a big culture shock to me, but certainly, that's an element there right on the PMI website as to what's changed. Is part of it takes into consideration the Agile environments and Scrum and things like that.
All right, so
that brings me to where I'm at.
When you came to version 6, right? So obviously you had jumped into a bunch of materials for version 5.
Correct. Yeah, plenty of materials.
What was your basic? Did you have a basic approach for your version 5? What materials were you studying against?
So I was studying, the ITTO. I was obviously, studying all the different process groups and trying to fully understand.
You were reading books, or you were...
Oh, I was reading books. I don't know if you want me to name names, but I was reading books.
Well, to be honest, you could name a name where you could just say you had a PMP Prep book.
Yeah, well, I had a couple of PMP Prep books that I got as part of that boot camp. But to be honest, I'm not really great at just sitting down and turning pages. I get distracted. Things come up, work, family, life, and so I get easily distracted from the book. So, I would go to Starbucks or places like that and try and focus on the reading. It was good. I was doing that.
Did you use any alternative methods like videos or...
I did. So then I got the audio version of the Andy Crow book. There's an audio version where they're conversing about it, and it was good. I found that useful.
Conversations.
It's literally called Conversations. And what I liked about it was that it was a conversation, and there's little anecdotes in it. What was good was I could listen to it in the car while I was on a road trip for work, or I could listen to it on the airplane traveling for work.
Yeah.
But then, and I also did the prep cast with Cornelius, so I know that's how I found you, was actually through Cornelius' email announcing your weekend
coaching
seminars.
The coaching course.
Yes, exactly. So your coaching course, which I found to be very valuable. I was on one of the coaching courses that you offered where I think one of the 2 days had a little bit of a technical hiccup here.
Yes, that was very scary. Yes, we had a complete outage. We had a technical outage on my webinar platform tool, and I lost the entire class of, dozens and dozens of people, and I had to do a reschedule, but it worked out all right. Everybody was able to attend the reschedule, but yeah, there's a first time for everything, I suppose.
Yeah, and what I really appreciate about that is obviously things happen. I work in technical industry, technology industry, and things happen, right? And technology is great when it works, but when it doesn't, everybody, obviously expects that it does, and how dare it not work. Yep. But the reality is it happens sometimes, and you handled it extremely well. You sent out additional content. You sent out additional access to...
Tried to make it right.
More resources. So, and that was definitely appreciated. And obviously, your course is on the weekend, which is great because we're working, but at the same time, we also have personal lives. So what I really liked about it, above and beyond the fact that it was on the weekend, but it was recorded. So I could, from a hotel, the following week, which I did, log in, click the link, add my credentials, and then listen to it for another 45 minutes to an hour on my own time at a hotel.
So you signed up. You signed up for the live course.
I took the live course, and then
But you wound up just watching the recordings the following weekend.
I did, yeah. Every time I would travel, I would take at least a half an hour, 45 minutes from my hotel room, listen to it, and
so many people have told me what you just said. I've now started just selling my live recordings.
Oh, I think that's huge. I think that's
and people love it because they still feel like they're engaged, like a classroom experience, but they can watch them whenever they want. All right, so let's fast forward. So, you've done this ton of studying, didn't work out for version 5. Now you go in and you take the version 6 exam. What was your experience like with the version 6 exam just by itself?
Yeah, so version 6, well, obviously I passed, so happy to report that I passed.
Congratulations.
Version 6, thank you very much. And I would say, it's the second time I attempted version 5, I was really close, on their little
with the needle
bar graph there where they show you where you're at, meeting expectations or just below or substantially needs improvement or whatever. So I was just below the line. So I knew I was close, but I also knew that 6 was coming, and I'm close on 5, but 6 about to change, and I only had like 2 weeks, and there was no more availability. I think probably a lot of people that are listening might have gone through this where they were trying to get it scheduled for version 5. And between, March 5th or whatever date I took version 5 and the 26th when it was changing, there just wasn't any availability.
Frank, so I know somebody who got the exam scheduled like, I don't know, say the 23rd, and there was a power outage in the facility that day. And I don't believe that they were able to retake the version 5.
No, I was thinking that something like that could happen, right?
Yeah.
So we all face different weather. I'm in Chicago in the Midwest, and something could happen even in March. You could get a snowstorm where you might miss your exam and not be able to get it rescheduled. Oof. So yeah, it could happen.
Right, but that didn't happen to you. You got it.
It didn't happen to me. So
what was it like?
Yeah, so version 6 I found to be, in my opinion, a lot easier to understand, right? So the first bullet point on the PMI website in talking about what's changing, it talks about the leadership role of the project manager, and that there's a chapter in PMBOK 6 dedicated to this, and that's
the role of the project
manager.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I found there to be a lot more role-based questions, which I actually found to be good, right? So those are questions that I felt extremely comfortable in answering. They make sense, right? When you think about what would you do in this situation, and it gives you a different scenario, and it could be what would you have done differently to avoid this, or what should the project manager have done differently to avoid this, or what is the next step? Here's where you're at. You've taken over a project, or you were assigned a project. What is your next step?
Right.
When I hear and read questions like that, I can put myself in the role of the project manager, which is the whole point. In the exam, so I'm putting myself in that role, in that question, and here's what I would do, or here's what I believe that person should do. And when I was asked those questions, I felt a lot more confident in answering them. Not that I wasn't comfortable in answering questions about inputs and tools and techniques and outputs, and those questions are still on 6, but I felt that there was a lot more on version 5.
Right, and this is sort of, I guess the way they're, I don't know exactly the right phrase, but the way they're grouping or tailor, or the way they're, sort of adjusting the framework, including the ITTOs and how they're packing some of the ITTOs and categorizing some of the things. It seems to be more like logical.
Exactly, and I think the logic works for me. Just memorizing formulas, which is certainly still important, and memorizing the ITTO, which is certainly important. It seemed to be less of an emphasis on that in the test that was based on version 6.
All right, now, let me ask you, what about, we have this big section on Agile in the new PMBOK, right?
Yep.
All right, so you went through version 5. It didn't work out. You're into version 6. Now, let me ask you, with these test questions, as you explained to them a little bit of the difference on how they're presented and how it made more sense to you, what about the Agile? we heard there was going to be a lot of Agile. Did you feel like Agile was dispersed throughout the domains compared to version 5?
So that's a great question. As I mentioned, I work for a company that does do Agile. We have daily Scrum calls and stand-up calls. So I was familiar with it, but I also still studied up on it just to be prepared. I didn't see a lot of questions that dealt directly with Agile, but then afterwards I was kind of curious because I really thought there was going to be a lot. I went back and read again the PMI website that explains what's changing on March 26th, what was changing, and it said that Agile's kind of sprinkled throughout, and that's taken into consideration. That's probably
going to become a trend. Probably, that's probably going to grow over time.
Yeah, and it talked about emerging practices, and I think emerging practices, that's some of the emerging practices that PMI is recognizing. So I think whether you work for a company that's waterfall or Agile, and you're doing Scrum and things like that, I think it's important for you to be familiar with it anyways, just, for your professional development. And knowing that it's part of the exam makes people do it that don't work in that environment. Like I said, I work in that environment today, so it's something I'm comfortable with, I'm familiar with. I did study up on it. I didn't find it to be an overwhelming amount, but I think if you're not in that environment today, it's something that people want to familiarize with themselves with anyways, because it's coming, and more you're seeing it. And if it's not something you're doing internally, maybe your customer or your vendor is using it, and you need to know it from that aspect.
Yeah, no doubt. And so, but like at the end of the day, in your mind, version 5 was actually harder than version 6 because, maybe it's just your particular experience or your learning style, but you personally feel that version 5 was trickier than version 6.
I find it that way because I like the role-based questions. I like the scenarios that I was presented, and then how do you manage through this, which I think is really probably the most important thing for project management, is how do you deal with the curveballs or with the scenarios that come to us in our career, in our positions in project management.
Well, I think
memorizing formulas is important, but when it comes to needing that formula, I can look it up, right? I can look at work. I can look up a formula. If I need to find out earned value or any other formula I need to figure out, I have those. I can look them up on Google, or I have them in my resource library in the PMO. I don't have to have it memorized. On the exam, you do, because you don't have those resources, and that's fine. But I think 6 is good. I think it's real life is what it's.
Sounds like to me, sounds to me like they're making efforts to make it more, realistic. Now, so that's cool. That's really cool. So let me ask you this then. So if version 6 is sort of more in line with your way of thinking and stuff, because, I got to tell you, most of the people I've met with, they hate those scenario-based questions. That's their, like, that's like the worst thing that they've ever experienced. They hate it. It's like 2 or 3 sentences. Something happened, blah, blah, blah. What should you do next? And, a couple of the answers, you can eliminate. And then 1 or 2 answers, it could be either one. You're not sure which one, right? And that's just people's the bane of their existence. They're so miserable about those types of questions. But for you, I guess the way it's presented in the new format, like something like clicked a little bit for you.
Yeah, and I think for anybody that's a strength for them or perhaps it's a weakness for them, if they could just look at the question and try and determine what is the best course of action or what is the best answer in this situation, you don't have to necessarily think, well, this is the absolute only answer, because the reality is sometimes there's more than one answer that could apply. In the real world, there probably is more than one answer that could apply to one of these scenarios that comes up. But what I think PMI is looking for, obviously it's the right answer. They want you to have the right answer. You're being graded and on a test. But what it boils down to for me, the way to look at it would be, what is the best answer? What would be the best course of action in this scenario? And if you think about it that way, I believe you're probably going to get the right answer more often than not. You might not always come up with the best answer, which would mean that
it's a mindset.
Right
You're
answer.
Right.
But it's the mindset if you go in there. Yeah. What would be my best course of action in this scenario?
Yeah, you have your mindset, that that certain hat that you're wearing. You're always trying to determine what's going to be the impact of this on the project. Let me assess it, and then let me determine what the next course of action would be. You might look at the answers and see that 2 or 3 of them are things that you would maybe do at some point, but which one of them is the thing that you would do right away?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
or if it's a question like, how do you avoid something like this happening, right? Well, what could have been done to avoid this?
Right.
Well, it's possible that 1 or 2 of those things could have helped prevent it, but which is the best one? Which is the most likely one to have helped prevent whatever went wrong?
Those are the shades of gray that drive people completely bonkers. But but thank you, Frank, so much for taking this time with me today. I really appreciate it. I know that people are going to love this podcast because so many of my people have been asking me, "Hey Dan, when are you going to do a bridge course between version 5 and version 6?" And I am planning on doing a special webinar in the near future where I'm going to do a big presentation on the difference, like on a bridge course between version 5 and version 6. And actually right now, today I released my trial of my version 6 course, my recorded online course at www.pmexamcoach.com. And that course is just integration, right, Frank? So it's going to be like all the videos you need to watch. All right, it's going to have the integration workbook, and it's going to have an integration quiz. It's all bundled together in one module for the customer. And so I just launched that today for version 6. And it was a great launch today, and now people are trying that out. And mid-April, I'm going to come out with my full-blown PMP version 6 online course with all the assessments, workbooks, and everything.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. But so thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time today. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about or any other comments?
No, I just wanted to, again, thank you for your help, and I found your study group course extremely valuable. Obviously, anybody that's listening to this podcast, I would highly recommend it if you haven't already signed up for it, and then take advantage of the recorded sessions as they're sent out after the trainings, and definitely appreciated that opportunity, and you certainly helped me in passing my exam, so I appreciate it.
Well, those are the words that I love to hear. All right. Well, thank you so much, Frank Napolitano, for being with us on the Project Management Coaching Podcast today as we finish up our episode number 2. Thank you so much, guys, and we'll see you next time.